By April of 1993, two things seemed certain about the Doctor Who franchise. One, it was probably not coming back to television anytime soon. There were whispers of the BBC doing something for the show's 30th anniversary, but that probably won't happen. The other certainty is that the Virgin New Adventures was here to stay. It wasn't just a one-off miniseries, it wasn't a short burst of tie-in literature, this had legs. It had an audience, and it had a gaggle of fresh-faced writers hungry to leave their mark on Doctor Who. What it arguably didn't have was discipline. We have seen the works of 12 writers so far, and they've all had very different ideas as to what the core ideas of Doctor Who are, what the personalities of the main characters are, and where they are in their personal growth, and the general rules of this universe and the nature of time travel. Well, no more, screamed editor Peter Darvill-Evans. We are the official continuation of Doctor Who, damn it, and we're gonna act like it. I will get everyone on the same page, even if I have to write an entire book myself, cleaning up past mistakes, setting things up for the future, and giving a shining example to new writers as to what the Virgin New Adventures should be. And so, he did. Or at least he tried to. This is Deceit by Peter Darvill-Evans. Before we begin, a little bit of house cleaning. In my last Crossing the Wilderness, I implied that the Doctor meets a famous artist and confronts something related to their art stories or exclusively a New Who thing. I had completely forgotten about Time Lash, where the Sixth Doctor met a young H.G. Wells and went on a science fiction adventure with him. In my defense, nobody cares about Time Lash. Also, this is my first Doctor Who video since they announced Jodie Whittaker as the 13th Doctor, so let me just say that I am so on board. I really hope she's given some great episodes and becomes one of the all-time classic Doctors. Screw the haters, let's do this. So, Deceit. It's the 26th century, and the Dalek Wars are coming to a close, with Earth and its allies coming up the victor. With freed up resources, Earth starts the process of consolidating the hundreds of space colonies spread out across the galaxy. While their focus was on the war, most colonies were managed not by any recognized government, but rather interstellar corporations. As you can imagine, profit-driven organizations having access to entire planets of people and resources is a recipe for some shady shit. One such example is the colony of Arcadia, run by the Spinward Corporation. Little communication comes from the planet, and the Office of External Operations has a sneaking suspicion that something illegal is going down. This falls into the hands of Agent Isabella DeFries and her ship full of auxiliary troops who are bored now that the war is over. As extra insurance, a secret weapon is brought on board in case things get especially hairy. But there's a complication. It seems one of the troopers isn't who they say they are, and while this weird anachronistic individual is resourceful and indeed helpful for their mission, DeFries doesn't quite trust them. And just what is going on in Arcadia? Renfest! Specifically, the colonists have reverted to a medieval-style civilization, with castles and villages and kings. It's actually quite utopic. It's clean, the weather's always nice, there's always enough to eat, but there are a few quirks. One, nobody lives past the age of 30. There's no Logan Run-style sacrificial ceremony, that's just when these people naturally pass. Two, the citizens are occasionally visited by the counselors, imposing hooded figures who give news and instructions from the faraway fortress of Landfall. One day, a counselor warns the people that a ship is coming, and with it, a plague that could destroy them all. This puts the fear of God into everyone, and when a weird, anachronistic individual wanders into town, they start to panic. This person seems nice and helpful, though, so the townspeople hide them away in one of their homes. But this house has a secret of its own, one that the stranger plans to discover. So, what is Spinward's game? Well, Brita Hoffman is about to become a very important piece in it. An employee working in Spinward's monitoring station, she is soon picked out for her intelligence and inquisitive nature and brought to Lasuna, the station commander. Lasuna has been physically modified to interface with a Gestalt being known as Pool, a collection of the most brilliant scientific minds Spinward's been able to collect. A being so intelligent, it's able to change reality with thought. Lasuna serves as Pool's sensory organ, and her master has sadistic pleasures, which for Bretta means numerous torture sessions. Her pain and anguish are meticulously recorded. However, something has disrupted this ritual. A stranger, a weird anachronistic individual with a mind that would be a great addition to Poole's growing intelligence. Oh, and this stranger is the Doctor, by the way. And the stranger back in the medieval town? Professor Bernice Summerfield. And the stranger on DeFreeze's ship? Ace! Yes, Ace is back, kiddies. Strap in because things are about to go boom. So yeah, we only got 3 aceless books between Love and War now, which perhaps doesn't seem long enough for her turn to have a huge impact. Don't worry, Peter Darvill-Evans made sure that it was never any tension to begin with by spoiling Ace's return before Love and War even hit shelves. This book doesn't treat it as a secret. The back cover announces her return, and the front cover has her standing there wearing a jacket with the word Ace printed on it, and oh god, what's going on with Ace's face? Her neck's craning unnaturally, her eyes are off in another zip code, her right cheekbone apparently juts forward 6 inches. This is the only cover art done by a guy named Luis Ray. I don't know if it's the same Luis Ray who does all the dinosaur art, but whoever it is, I'm glad they never drew Ace again. Anyway, my point was, at no point did the Virgin New Adventures try to surprise its readers with Ace's return. So, what was even the reason of her temporary absence in the series? Well, there isn't much of an official word on the matter, at least none that I've found, but I do have a theory. As the Virgin New Adventures was kicking off, nobody could really agree on anything, from the overall goals of the series to the characterizations of its main characters. I've discussed it before, but Ace, the confident young woman from Andrew Cartmell's Cat's Cradle Warhead, was immediately followed by the immature teen of Andrew Hunt's Cat's Cradle Witchmark. It's not that either characterization on its own is necessarily wrong, but the two versions of Ace are contradictory and in the wrong order. Between a young series trying to find its feet, the limits of communication in the pre-internet days, and a wide variety of fresh-faced writers thinking they'll write Doctor Who how it should be written, never mind what other people think, and you just get all these contradictions. Putting Ace on the bench for a bit allowed the character to have a fresh start, putting all new writers on the same page. It's 3 years later. Ace has been traveling the stars, joining the fight against the Daleks, hardening up. She's less prone to childish impulses. She doesn't jump around yelling, "Ace!" like an excited little puppy. She's an experienced soldier, interested in physical companionship, but not so much romantic companionship anymore. And like her mentor, she bucks the system and walks around like she owns the place. The woman didn't move away. She was squatting next to the bunk. She wanted him to see what she was doing. She was using the knife to remove her own ID chip, slicing through the epidermis between her breasts, slowly and carefully making tiny incisions that would free the implant without drawing blood. She took her time, glancing up from time to time, smiling. "That's it," she said, "and now you become me." She pressed her ID chip against his chest and sprayed the area with an atomizer. "Plastigraphed," she said. "You already look as good as new. And now I become..." She took the papers from his shirt pocket. "I become Reynold Yesti, second tracker." What a come down. "Never mind, it's only temporary, just until I get on board that troop ship and we're into warp." She fondled the atomizer and licked her lips as she squirted artificial skin into her cleavage. "Well, that was wonderful, darling. How was it for you?" He fell sideways to the bunk. "Who?" he managed to say. She dropped the metallic cube into her backpack and slung the pack over her shoulder. "You deaf or something? I'm you, of course. And you, for a while anyway, are Ace, who blows things up. Now, I'm off to join the celebrations, and then I'm going to Arcadia to kill Daleks. Sleep well." "Aw, Lucky! Why does this jerk get to be Ace? I want to be Ace!" This hard reset of Ace has been dubbed by fans as New Ace, and she was met with a mixed reception. I'm not going to get too into depth the character changes here. This is just a basic reintroduction, and future books explore the implications of this change in much greater depth. But I do think the initial decision was a smart one in getting everyone on track with the character. This is not the only way this book gets characters back on track, though. The Doctor's had some noticeable mood swings over the last several books, like his emotional outbursts in Mark Gatiss' Nightshade. Well, this book makes it so that all of this was the result of an external influence. See, when the TARDIS was repaired using fantasy alien stuffing and cat's cradle witch mark, it became contaminated with a bit of demon material. While not malicious in nature, this demon stuff has influenced the Doctor and the TARDIS in negative ways. This feels a lot more retconny than it actually is. The contamination moment in Witchmark is a very blink and you'll miss it moment, and I don't think it ever came up again between then and now, so I wonder if this was ever an intended storyline, or rather, Peter Darvill-Evans realizing he could course correct with a bit of forgotten continuity. Due to some sci-fi jiggery-pokery, Ace finds herself with the Doctor in the Zero Room in the TARDIS, a containment room designed to be completely separated from the rest of the universe. The influence of the demon material has gotten so bad that the Doctor has completely lost his memory. But Ace helps him regain them. Since this is their first meeting after Ace's departure, they air out some of their grievances. "And what about me, Doctor? I was so young in those days. You needed me, so you stopped me staying with Robin. You needed me, so you let Jan die. And then you made me leave the TARDIS. I thought I was making the decision, but you wanted me out, and so out I went." The Doctor turned away from her. His voice was low and tight. "You haven't changed, have you, Ace? You always do this to me. I've only just got my mind back. It wasn't a game. I've made mistakes recently. People have died. Now, for the first time since I repaired the link, I am free of the presence that's been riding inside me. Is it any wonder that I was bad-tempered? And all you can do is blame me for your boyfriend problems." Ace opened her mouth to yell at him, and found herself laughing instead. She'd made him angry, and that still gave her a perverse buzz. And he was quite right, of course. She'd long ago considered both Robin and his bicycle, and Jan and his snake tattoo, to the lucky escape category of old lovers. "Never mind, Doc. It was all a long time ago." Wow, this is uncomfortable. The implication here is that the Doctor deliberately pushed Ace out of the TARDIS to deal with this alien infestation, which also feels a bit retconny, though Paul Cornell wrote Love and War knowing that Ace would be coming back in a few books, so who can say. I still don't like it as a creative decision, as it removes a lot of Ace's agency in her final decision in that book, diminishing one of the most emotional moments in the series thus far down to just another chess move in the Doctor's unfathomable game. But maybe that's the point. This is, after all, a major recalibration of the characters. This whole book is basically a big waypoint for the entire Wilderness years. Just the fact that it was written by Peter Darvill-Evans, the guy in charge of the entire Virgin New Adventures, means Deceit has to be seen as the base example of what a book in this series should be. It's no surprise then that this book kind of feels like a sample platter of different genres and ideas. A little bit of Space Marines, a little bit of high fantasy, a little bit of cosmic horror, a bit of twisted sexual perversion for spice, and a handful of major set pieces that would make for a striking cover. "Bloody hell," Ace said at last. "Captain, take a look at this asteroid belt we almost hit." The gasps of shock were audible, and were the only sounds to break the silence for several minutes. The asteroid belt was a wide ribbon, lying on a slight diagonal across the entire breadth of the screen at the rear of the bridge, and thinning as it curved forwards, until on the front-facing screens it was a barely visible line that disappeared behind the sun. The racetrack had moved significantly far inside the belt for the individual rocks and boulders to be indistinguishable, and therefore the larger patterns were all the more obvious. The lumps of space rock had been arranged. It was impossible, but they could all see it. Rough chunks of stone and metal, some as big as a planet's moon, most no larger than boulders, had been grouped together in distinct aggregations, and each aggregation of rock had been organized to resemble a human face, and each face was grotesque and contorted. Okay, that's pretty cool. Isolated cool. Nothing in this book is as cool as that, but the right kind of striking, can't do it on a TV budget imagery one hopes for in a Doctor Who novel. So you have a book written by the guy who decides who gets to write books. A book that lays down a lot of the groundwork for how these characters in this universe is expected to work by virtue of the authoritative name on the cover. And I haven't even gotten to the stuff in the end. But how did Peter Darvill-Evans feel about the whole thing? What's the word of God on this? Well, let's meet that God. Okay, that came out a little weird. Peter Darvill-Evans was born in Buckinghamshire in 1954. His father was a teacher and later headmaster and promoted reading within the household, and Darvill-Evans became a self-described voracious reader, spending his teen years up to his nose in fantasy, sci-fi, crime, and historical fiction. When it came to Doctor Who, he was a regular watcher, though not a hardcore fan.
I've always watched Doctor Who. I'm old enough, I'm afraid, to remember watching the very first episode in 1963, and I've watched it ever since. I mean, it's one of the few programs that I would always watch. The only years I missed were a few of the Pertwee years while I was at university and didn't have access to a television. But it's a program that I'd always watch, even if I wasn't enjoying it very much. I'd always watch it. So to that extent, I was a fan. What I wasn't was the kind of fan who went to conventions and knitted Tom Baker scarves and that kind of thing. I just watched it on television because I liked it. That was the sum total of my fandom.
A model student, he attended the Royal Grammar School in High Wycombe and managed to take his O and A levels 2 years early, and then went on to graduate from University College London in 1975 with a degree in history. He was also interested in board and card games, especially in the strategic board game Diplomacy, and was a regular reader of Games and Puzzles magazine. One day, in the back of an issue, he found an advertisement for a job as a trainee shop manager at Game Centre, one of the first specialist game shops in London. The man who owned the store also loved Diplomacy, and Darvill-Evans got the job. In the mid-1970s, games for adults started to become a booming business. There was a market for more complex board games, chess and wargaming was seeing a resurgence, and of course, Dungeons & Dragons became a thing. A new market meant a lot of small, out-of-their-garage companies, including Games Workshop, which in the beginning was just a two-man team, Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone. Darvill-Evans got to know the two of them because they would personally deliver their products to the store. When Jackson and Livingstone opened a Games Workshop retail outlet in West London, they offered Darvill-Evans a manager position. Shortly thereafter, he was promoted to their warehouse working trade sales. Darvill-Evans' first job in publication came in managing Game Workshop's self-promotional magazine White Dwarf, and later Warlock, a tie-in magazine to Jackson Livingstone's gamebook series Fighting Fantasy. Published by Puffin, the Fighting Fantasy books distinguish themselves from other game books like Choose Your Own Adventures by including tabletop RPG elements like stat and dice rolling. They were basically single-player RPG modules. Jackson and Livingstone wrote the first 10 books themselves, and their names were stamped on all of the books they didn't write. In 1985, Jackson and Livingstone sold Games Workshop, and Darvill-Evans was out of a job. But as part of his redundancy payoff, he was given a contract to write a fighting fantasy book. His book, Beneath Nightmare Castle, would end up being published in 1987. But something about the whole process rubbed him the wrong way. The author's name was never on the cover. I had a contentious discussion with Annie Winterbotham of Puffin about this. I thought it was wrong that authors who wrote for the series didn't get their names on the covers, and I tried very hard to convince her that Puffin should change that policy. So I was delighted when my contract arrived, and it stated that my name would appear on the front cover. Then Annie told me that it was a mistake, and I said it was too late. The contract had been signed by both parties, and I expected Puffin to honor it. I stayed in touch with both Ian and Steve after the closure of Games Workshop's London premises and saw them occasionally, and it was Ian who told me that I was making myself unpopular at Puffin and that they'd probably scrap my book rather than change the cover design to include authors' names. So I had to surrender. I signed an addendum to the contract. I still think I was right, though. When you see a name on the cover of a book, you think it's the author's. After I sent the forms to apply for income from Public Lending Right, I received a letter stating that I was ineligible as, according to their records, Beneath Nightmare Castle was written by Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone. I had to send a photocopy of the title page to prove that I am the author, which I think demonstrates my point about the importance of the name on the cover. Despite Puffin's shitty behavior, Darvill-Evans would write 2 more game books for the series, 1989's Portal of Evil and 1991's Spectral Stalkers. Before all that, however, Darvill-Evans would end up getting a job with W.H. Allen. I've already gone into detail how Darvill-Evans ended up in the position as the head of Virgin New Adventures. You can find that in the series introduction. With his experience with Puffin, Darvill-Evans opted for this Doctor Who project to be a positive experience for authors. He not only made sure the author's name was clearly present on the front cover, suck it, Puffin, he also made sure authors had full copyright of their works and got paid accordingly.
Although when we started the New Adventures, I used authors who'd written novelizations, authors who I knew I could rely on, I very quickly realised that I had a vast pool of talent from Doctor Who fans who could write, and I was more than happy to bring them all in. I think it's worth saying that of all the things that I'm proud of about the Doctor Who publishing that we did in the 1990s, the thing that really gives me the most pleasure is that we were able to give that opportunity to all those previously unknown authors, and indeed some who were previously known, to get books published and get them out to the public. As it turned out to be very good business. We were able to give the authors a reasonable royalty rate, and we allowed them to keep their copyright, so they got royalties on reprints and that kind of thing. It wasn't just a matter of buying the text outright. We left them with their copyright.
He also worked hard to keep communications with and between authors open, keeping up a dialogue with both established and prospective writers. This included several get-togethers a year. The footage you're watching here is one from September 1993. I had no qualms with Peter Darvill-Evans when starting this project, but after doing research for this video, I've genuinely come to love the guy. I may not agree with every creative decision made under his leadership, but he clearly cared about giving a positive platform for new writers and empowering them in as many ways as possible. In a world where stories about studios or publishers or producers screwing over the artists making their products is so commonplace, Peter Darvill-Evans is a breath of fresh air. And what of Deceit? Yes, it's a book to show what the Virgin New Adventures was aiming to be. This is even more evident near the end, where we first have a short Lord of the Rings style appendix detailing the history of humanity's conflict with the Draconians and Daleks, emphasizing this future history as the ideal setting for the series. And then we have an afterword, which largely consists with Darvill-Evans' rules on time travel in the Doctor Who universe. For example, you can't change the past. You can only change the future relative to your present. The trick is, the Doctor's present, Gallifrey's present, is millions of years before Earth was even created. Everything the Doctor interacts with is in his relative future. It's an interesting idea, a solid rule as to how the Doctor Who universe works, and like all rules about how the Doctor Who universe works, barely anyone followed it. But there is more to this book than just a statement of intent for the series. This is Peter Darvill-Evans testing the standards he created and enforced with this series. Thing is, see, as editor of the New Adventures, I got responsibilities, and I got authority. Rookie authors from all over, they come to me begging on their knees to write a Doctor Who story. They come crawling across broken glass. Okay, so I exaggerate. You get the picture anyhow. I'm the guy who has to tell them what to do. And I'm telling you, it's a lonely job. And I ain't easy on these guys. Uncle Joe Stalin's Gulag maintenance program got nothing on the guidelines I send out to writers. Maybe not how I would have phrased it, but never mind. What I'm trying to say is that as the series editor of the New Adventures, I have to inflict rigorous guidelines on prospective authors, and it seemed both sensible and fair to subject myself to the same discipline. It was, it turns out, a very worthwhile exercise. So much so that I now think that any editor of a genre fiction who hasn't written a standard work in that genre shouldn't be in the job. Writing Deceit has given me new insights into the New Adventures, particularly in practical matters. How many major characters can a new adventure accommodate? How many plot strands are ideal? How many companions should the Doctor have? I was relieved that, in writing a story according to my own guidelines, I found that most of the advice and strictures I gave myself were to the point. I now know, however, that in a few areas I was being too rigid. It isn't strictly necessary to introduce all the main characters within the first quarter of the book, for instance, and it doesn't destroy all the drama and tension if you allow the reader occasional glimpses into the Doctor's private thoughts. So it was useful for me. How was it for you? I ask in innocence. I really don't know how to evaluate Deceit. One's own writing is the most difficult to assess. Every other new adventure author has had his work monitored by an editor. Not me. It's kind of undercover boss, really, and it's super commendable, wanting to know where your system works and where it doesn't. Again, Darvill-Evans going that extra mile for his authors. That said, he says his work wasn't monitored by an editor, which I don't think is entirely accurate to say. He wasn't the only editor on staff. Rebecca Levine was on board at the time, and according to Darvill-Evans in a later interview, was at least involved with Deceit's results. I had written a lengthy guide for prospective Doctor Who authors, and I wanted to see whether they were practicable. So I set myself the task of writing a novel. It was okay, competent. I gave my Doctor Who editor, Rebecca Levine, the instructions that she was to consider for publication those submissions that were better than Deceit. Once again, I think it's fantastic that Darvill-Evans did all of this work to make sure he was doing right by the creators under his employ. But I also wonder if there's a bit of mixed messaging in the results. From the perspective of a writer looking to get into the new adventures, they're going to look towards Deceit as an example of what content and quality of writing the publishers are looking for, while Darvill-Evans used it to find out what was wrong with his approach and determined that for books to be accepted, they had to be better than Deceit in content and quality of writing. Would this have a positive or negative effect on the series? Well, we'll see. Oh, yeah, I guess I have to talk about him. Okay, remember when I said DeFreeze was bringing along a secret weapon? The secret weapon turns out to be Absalom Dak, Dalek Killer. Created for a comic story for Doctor Who magazine in 1980, Absalom Dak was a hardened space criminal selected as part of a Dalek Killer program of sending death row inmates on suicide missions into Dalek space. It turns out Dak is really good at killing Daleks, and is only more motivated after his love interest is fridged. The character was, A, an independent creation for the magazine so they didn't have to keep getting the rights like they did with other Doctor Who elements, and B, a hyper-violent creation meant to attract the 2000 AD readers. He's a stupid character, but one that has some popular appeal, and even became the first, and I think so far only comic character to be referenced in the actual TV show proper. In Time Heist, the 5th episode of Series 8, the guy's ugly mugshot is seen shuffled in with a bunch of other bad guy pictures. I really hope this opens the door to Jodie Whittaker teaming up with Frobisher, the shape-shifting alien detective trapped in the form of a penguin, or Croton, the Cyberman who retained his emotions. And maybe they can encounter Death's Head, the robot assassin whose existence means Doctor Who exists in the Marvel Universe. Maybe I should do a video on the comics. Dak is like the least interesting thing out of all of it. I'm not really sure why he's in this book. Unlike New Ace, his presence in the story was actually kept a secret, but how many readers actually knew about him before this? Not people who just watched the TV show. It'd have to be a core fan base with fond memories of 13-year-old comic stories. What does he contribute to the story? Nothing, really. He's a maniac with a chainsaw sword who doesn't follow the rules, and actually seems like he'd be a liability in DeFreeze's mission here. He just kinda does what he wants, and he's really disappointed that there's no Daleks to kill. You brought the guy whose entire MO is killing exclusively Daleks on a mission with no Daleks. Death's Head wouldn't have had this problem. What's more, Dak is just gross. Ace had time to spot the tiny red light that represented the ship just inside a band of white cloud that circled the entire system. Then the ship bucked like a ketch in a tempest, and the Dalek Killer fell across her chair. "You can get up now," Ace said, trying to shift her legs under the weight of the recumbent Dak. He moaned theatrically and tried to lift himself off her chair. He succeeded only in jamming his right hand between her thighs and giving her a broad grin before he collapsed again. Why do I feel like John Peel suggested putting Dak in this book? I have a hard time believing Peter Darvill-Evans even knew about the character before writing this. He has no business in this story. There's some tension in Ace having to make sure he stays alive to preserve the timeline, but that turns out not to actually matter because I usually don't spoil the end of these books, but this Absalom Dak is a clone of the original. Like, why? If he's not the original, why would anyone care about his guest appearance here? Wouldn't the resources used in cloning this guy and implanting that clone with the original's memories be better served creating an actual genetically modified super soldier that will follow orders and not fondle the crew? Why waste your time to Bernice ducked her head. The explosion hurt her ears and flooded her closed eyes with red light. When she looked up, Dak's headless body was still shumbling forward, collapsing slowly, and then crashing to the floor like a felled tree. Oh, I see. You make him a clone so you can kill the shithead. Cool, I'm down with that. Really, this is all just a bit of violent runaround so that we can create a new status quo. The Doctor, Professor Bernice Summerfield, and now Ace, traveling together in the TARDIS. And the book doesn't even pretend that there isn't tension. Ace still hasn't totally forgiven the Doctor, and to her, Bernice is nothing but the Doctor's most recent pet. Bernice doesn't fully trust Ace, thinks she might have some ulterior motives. And the Doctor, well, the Doctor's game never ends. Three's Company, this is not. Really, my opinions of this book don't matter that much. In terms of continuity, this book is unskippable. In terms of the book's historical importance in the greater Doctor Who franchise, it's required reading. As an actual piece of entertainment, it's fine. It's okay. It doesn't have a lot going on under the hood thematically. It's mostly just a number of set pieces that are interesting in concept, but not really explored a great deal. Plus a lot of hyperviolence, just a smidgen of uncomfortable sexual assault and sexual torture. It's not Time Worm Genesis bad, but it is notable in a book from the guy running the show. You have to be in the right mindset to really enjoy this book. Like, if you've ever wondered what Heavy Metal 2000 might be like if the Doctor was in it, I don't know. It's the literary equivalent of a pack of ramen noodles. It'll fill you up, and there's the implication of some flavor, but really it's a lot of empty calories. But nobody comes to Deceit for the story. They come for the introduction of New Ace, and the guest appearance of Absalom Dak, and the fact that Peter Darvill-Evans wrote it, and all the world building on the back end. It's way more interesting as a Doctor Who artifact than as a science fiction book. It's still a breath of fresh air after The Pit, and yeah, I'm glad this book led me to do this video and got me to do more research on Peter Darvill-Evans. I've really come away from this liking the guy so much more. A good writer? Yeah, he's adequate. A good editor and boss? One of the best, and I mean that. Really, I don't have much more to say. This book puts a lot of toys in the toy box. We just have to wait and see how other writers play with those toys. Next time, bad things happening on a planet called Lucifer? Who'd have thunk it? Ace reveals her ulterior motives in a plot so thick, it took 2 people to write.